Hello from Cairo. Pamela and
Welcome.
Laura have made a great journey out to Egypt. And our journey began in the Red Sea, which is so extraordinary and beautiful. The wildlife and the people and the water, it's so clear and so extraordinary. But that, of course, is not what we're here to talk about, is it, Laura?
We're here to connect dots, Pamela.
Yes, we are. Well, Laura it came out here a year ago, and on the boat that we enjoyed this year, out to the Sataya Reef, where we spent almost a week. There was an opportunity to do some direct contact work with non-human intelligences. And it was also a wonderful week for clear skies. And, you're in the middle of the Red Sea and there's very, very little around that area on either side of the deserts. But one of the things that I was really excited about was that Laura had had an extraordinary experience the year before, and I'm kind of hoping you'll share what happened from the
Yeah.
boat.
Yeah. So it was interesting because I went last year and it's a heart-opening experience in the Red Sea swimming with wild dolphins. So that's incredible. And so everyone's frequency and vibration was up incredibly. We saw a diamond-shaped UFO, UAP, that was beautifully shaped sacred geometrically shaped, that was watching us very floating in the air and would just disappear and come back, and it was very clear, and it gave me the idea of coming back again on the boat and doing direct contact with people who are interested and who have had contact before and who wanted to make contact again and see what messages we would receive, because we were going, this trip was about a pilgrimage and looking for answers and putting the pieces together about our ancient ancestors and the ET, NHI mystery that is now unfolding and has a lot of importance in our zeitgeist at the moment. And every day it seems like new information is coming out, and people are coming out to Egypt. Some of you may or may not know that NASA actually owns the inside of the King's Chamber in the Pyramid of Giza, and that is because of all of the very interesting technologies that they had. We're hypothesizing at least 12,000 years or more in pre-Diluvian, pre-flood, possibly, and most likely Atlantean technology.
It's certainly far older than what the standard citations allude to. And of course, Dr. Robert Schoch, a famous geologist, he certainly put his career on the line regarding the age of the Sphinx. But if you spend enough time, I mean, there are the popular sites, which we certainly did a few of those on this trip. But if you do maybe some of the off sites as well, and there are new sites opening up all the time, you start to find these outrageous megalithic structures with 100-ton blocks. And so we'll talk about that a little
Resemblance
bit.
to the Peruvian blocks that
Yes.
are found at the megalithic blocks.
I mean, which is something that Brian Forrester, who's got a fantastic webcast or podcast, he's been talking about this for years. So now, being out on the Red Sea, Laura had an opportunity to conduct some direct contact initiatives. A fantastic boat we were on had an upper deck that was open to the sky, and people would go up there and Laura would lead contact. So would you like to talk about what
Sure.
because a response happened?
So, well, it's the boat, the people on the boat. Maybe we can mention them more. They're called the Naraya, and there's a special man who is a dolphin being, dolphin shaman, a gifted psychic, intuitive, and we have the privilege of an honor of being on his boat and having the journey with the dolphins, who many know come from Sirius B, and the dolphin people have a very, very long history from the Dogon tribe to Egyptian mythology and to Sirius. And the places that in the journeys that we visited in this trip and the pilgrimage that we did on this trip was really to connect the Orion belt star systems that are directly aligned to the pyramids of Giza and also directly aligned to Sirius, and that very special temples that are very popular all were architecturally aligned to these celestial energy sites, and also correlating with dolphins themselves and their amazing ability, their sonar frequencies, their psychic abilities, their ability to connect to the heart, to save people, to know when to rescue people, to rescue and the rescuers, and very much the guardians of the sea and of the ocean. And in the Red Sea, we are in the heart of the world. We are experiencing the animals that are ruling the heart, and our friend who runs the ship calls them and is truly believes them as angels. So with all of this in mind, when we take this time to connect and commune with these beautiful dolphin beings in the Red Sea, we embark on a journey, starting some of the highlights. But before that, when we do direct contact on the Red Sea, we have we see orbs, many different orbs throughout the UAPs, smaller orbs, mainly up in different parts of the constellations. Most interestingly was the last orb that I had seen, and that we had all seen it as a group, that kept flying around Orion's belt, and he would blink on and off and on and off, and it was like a signal, and it wasn't Morse code, because we thought, is this Morse code? It wasn't Morse code, but it was some type of communication and signal, and he was circling and really pointing to the Orion's belt. So this is again the beginning of the adventure, and knowing that we are connecting, and that our journey and the journey that we're going, which as Osiris, the Orion's belt is connected with the underworld. So understanding that it's about life and death, and Sirius being in a lot of ways somewhat of a mystery, still also connected with Dendara, which we went to later, the goddess temple, Abydos.
So we were so lucky to have private time in several temples, including that of Sekmet, who is one of the very ancient goddesses, and is the other side, the ancient and rather terrifying side,
Yes,
of what is a better known goddess, but Sekmet is the older one. A temple that is just true to my heart, favorite temple is Dendera, which is dedicated to Hathor. There's also when we talk about a temple, there can be one large temple and a temple complex. And within that temple complex, there may be sectors that are dedicated to different gods or for different purposes. Many of these temples include birthing rooms or even birthing buildings, and where women could go and receive help during their births. There's all sorts of things. That's something you would see that's still there at Edfu. Dendera and Hathor's representations are palpable. It's known that there has been worship on the spot of the current Dendera temple, the current temple was built in the Ptolemaic, the Greek era, which is the last era of the dynastic periods of Egypt, but it was built on top of and in addition to, it was kind of it was a deep remodel, if you will, of a very ancient temple. And there was probably a temple there before that. But it's known that there's been something there for what's believed 10,000 years. It also is a complex. It's a very large complex. It had an extraordinary gymnasium area, a pool that went down multiple stories. There is a separate temple to Isis in the back that is very much Ptolemaic. enormous gates going out to the desert. It has, the first time I visited it was in 2006. There has been a lot of changes to many of these buildings. So if you haven't been here in a long time, you may be surprised to see that some of these complex and outer complex buildings have been altered in some way. There's a gate that was altered. What was the pool gymnasium building has been pretty much filled in with sand. You can still see one story of it, but it's a much deeper complex. And also, there's been some lovely things done in these temples to make them a little more accessible for more people as well. So there's, it's just kind of fascinating to be able to come over time. It's in the Temple of Dendera that the famous light bulb. I'm going to say light bulb because it doesn't really look like a light bulb.
And we have some theories about what it might be.
Yes, and we recorded while we were in there, so I will post that and have a link for it. But from that and the really ancient goddess worship, and seeing Hathor is the other side of this terrifying lioness god Sekmet. And Sekmet was one of the goddesses that had many attributes that were handed off to gods later, such as many of Thoth's abilities were actually originally attributed to Sekmet, such as architecture. Interesting thing if you're into that. Let's stay on the NHI UAV part.
But just note to that, because I think that we could definitely see the connection, since we call these people like Toth, and his name was Enki in ancient Sumeria. He's Mercury. He's the god of the planet and god of the mind, intellect, skill, knowledge, information. But Mercury was never actually a woman or a man. He, she, they is a mutable, constantly flowing thought formation energy of constantly learning and understanding things. And so this attribute energy went from being attributed to a powerful feminine goddess such as Sekmet to turning Mercury more into a masculine entity. Although we know through astrology and ancient Sumerian astrology up into Greek astrology, which is very male-centered, that Mercury is always gender fluid.
So from Dendera, we went to Abydos, and Abydos is also the side of the Osirian. Abydos is in regards to connections with the potential ancient alien theories and those things, is the site where the very famous hieroglyphs that look like helicopters and a plane and those things are to be found. Um, one of the things to know about hieroglyphs is that even if it's a singular image and it looks like one solid image of something within a series of images, and it appears to be separate and singular, it might not be. It may actually be a conglomeration of glyphs. And so, just to, give credit to the people who have studied these for 2 more centuries, it's important to note that there is an enormous amount of study in Egypt. And we frequently throw, sometimes in the community of New Age theories, and certainly the UAP, UFO, NHI communities, we frequently throw the traditional archaeology and research under the bus. I don't think we should do that. There has been, decades upon decades of research done in these things. And so it's important to integrate the research, the solid science, peer reviewed, theories and into what's going on. And the best part about science is that it only holds until it's disproved.
That's true.
So,
absolutely
something that I think it's important for all of us in the community to remember. Having said that, now we're going to the Osirian, which is very, okay, so there's the Temple of Abydos, which is exquisite, has the King's List, the important thing about Dendera, many important things about Dendera. But Dendera has the very famous astrological plaque, which is not the original, has been taken out and is in a museum. But there is a replica that can be seen, and you can be in that space. But at Abydos, you have a larger temple complex with a very unique form of hieroglyph, which is stylistically deeper than most of what you see in the other, well, throughout Egypt. And that's during Ramesses III. Period that those kind of hieroglyphs were done. Now, behind the Abydos temple and below it by 20 feet, you walk down into what is the Osirian. Now, the Osirian is made of megalithic blocks. These are absolutely enormous.
They're like the ones in Peru, and we have to insert the name of the blocks that are in Peru. But they're created with absolutely no space in between, with puzzle shape, jigsaw type connecting pieces, so that they're completely impervious to falling, and which is why they've lasted for who knows, even if possibly millions of years. We don't know how old these structures are. And one thing that we have noticed, and Pamela has mentioned, and is certainly the case with Abydos and Osirian temples, are that younger, newer priesthoods and religions would build on top of the old ones. And the Catholic Church is extremely guilty of doing this in Mexico and Peru and South America.
Well, and throughout Europe.
And throughout Europe.
Over the Celtic sites.
And over all the pagan sites and ancient occult and secret mystery schools that have been around since who knows how long, pre-flood, Atlantean. And we see in many accounts, not just with the Catholic Church being possibly the most recent, if not the most recent, where there's definitely a war, a spiritual war between one type of power source crushing any of the nature religions and the nature and the ancient ways of that has been lost, that I would like to call the Atlantean and the Lemurian ways of the pre-flood technology and the secrets of our energy bodies and our intuitions, our abilities, our other senses that are no longer activated on a regular basis and known how to be utilized, as we are taught only about the five senses. In these ancient societies, humanity was taught about the sixth and seventh and eighth senses that we are now starting to, again, with a new era and zeitgeist coming with the age of Aquarius, a lot of intellectual thinking, Thoth energy or Sekmet energy, Uranus energy, the planetary aspect of Aquarius that is ingressing into Aquarius from Pluto. Hades, the underworld, the dark god of the underworld. Here I have my lovely friend Osiris, who has been my guide on this journey, our guide on this journey, along with Sekmet, and who I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is the husband of Isis, who is the priestess as well, goddess of connected as well with Sekmet. And Pamela, I'd really like to know your thoughts about the difference between Isis and Sekmet. But the interesting thing is, in ancient Sumeria, Sekmet was Inanna, the goddess of love and war, the sister to Nigurshtanal. I know I'm butchering that, but her husband's name, he was the Osiris, and he was married to Nigurshtanal, who was the goddess of the underworld, who ruled the underworld with her husband, who was the ancient Sumerian version of Osiris. And so we have the goddess of the underworld married to the god of the underworld in ancient Sumeria. Those mythologies shifting to a certain degree, gods and energies shifting in ancient Egypt, but then also Inanna.
Well, and then the
And
question
Sekmet.
is, when you get to these archaeological sites, and you clearly have a strata situation. So the Osirian, which is supposed to be the burial place of the head of Osiris, and Osiris had a bad relationship with his brother Seth, who didn't go well. Seth him and cut up his body into many pieces and strewn them all around Egypt. And Osiris's wife, the fabulous Isis, went and was able to find all of the pieces except for his male member. That's another story. But the Osirian is, in tradition, the head, the burial of the head of Osiris. And the thing that is just so striking as you walk down into the Assyrian, which has water flowing through it
Ancient
from
water.
from an underground source that they've not been able to find the how it's
The
getting in
origins.
and the origins of, but it's very clear that this is a very different architecture. This is a very ancient architecture. And on top of the enormous multi-ton columns that are surrounding it, you see more multi-ton columns broken on top. Yeah, it is extraordinary. Whatever happened there was big enough to knock over and literally break in two blocks of basalt and granite that were, 40 tons.
Detonation technology. We've thought of some theories here and there, as we don't know. It might come back later with some of our other travels in Egypt and in ancient sites, and what might have happened to them that might go back to that.
Well, what's important about the Osirian is that it, as all of these temples, they're all aligned astrologically, and they all still kind of fascinatingly function without being too far off their alignment. And so the trick is, and as many podcasts and researchers have looked at, they've looked at time frames where the alignments are correct, and this takes some of these temples back to pre-Diluvian again. Not all of them, but it's fascinating. Now, what was there's also acoustic alignments in those things that are exceptional.
It's fascinating how some of the older buildings that we believe are pre-diluvian, pre-flood buildings at the very latest, and I myself believe Atlantean, so at least 26,000 years old or more. That's my personal perspective, just because the 12,000 years would just put it at the mark of precipitation, which would mean that they would be at the earliest 12,000 years old or longer. But from my own perspective and theories, I believe that these technologies have existed much earlier in civilizations that had a lot of technology that had to do with water. The structure, frequency, sound frequency, vibrational technology. So there's the technology of vibration, there's the technology of frequency that right now is being utilized a lot at places like the Monroe Institute and a lot of other consciousness schools and institutions, where they're playing around with the ideas of delta hertz, theta hertz, alpha hertz, Schumann frequency, beta, and then gamma and epsilon and all many in between. And these frequencies being technologies now being understood, and playing these types of frequencies in water, creating specific types of sacred geometric shapes, and understanding that the vibrational frequencies of these tones would then do the same to our bodies, since we are made up mostly of water biologically. So then these are molecularly shifting our whole entire physiological, biological beings, moving things around, percolating things in the body and the system in a way that was spiritual and physical and medicinal and emotionally elevating. And so a lot of this technology that we see, and as we search through high and low through all over the world and all through the megaliths all around the world. One thing that we do notice, one thing that is very much known by the ancients, is that vibrational and frequencies and water is a part of the technology that we could attribute to the Lemurian and Atlantean people. And if you look closely at the Osirian temple, you will see that there are these very much geometrical shapes, inserts of water along with earth, that at night, with pillars aligned in the ways that they are when there's moonlight shining down, and sound frequencies, because this particular building, which is actually not allowed to the public, and you have to pay an exorbitant amount of money and have to get a lot of permissions and security to get into.
And way ahead, by the way, if you have an interest in going into some of these spaces, reserve it as months ahead if you possibly can. I mean, definitely, go for it if you don't have that kind of time frame. But if you're more likely to get what you want if you can book it way ahead.
And another thing, not to plug us, but the thing is, we are continuing to work on these journeys and are looking for the right people to continue the research. So if you would like to be a part of what we're doing, contact us and talk to us about your reasons and what you want to do with the information of the past, because the more and more we go to these places and the less and less we read and the more and more we experience for ourselves, the answers are not the same as what we read, no matter the source.
There is nothing like standing in a place or in front of a body or something to see something is a little different. And so we're going to move on from the Osirian, and there are, if you're interested at all, there's fantastic information out there on frequencies and such. And if you're interested in water technology, water testing and technology, there is an absolutely beautiful documentary called The Memory of Water. And now there's much more out there. Outstanding researcher in Japan, outstanding researcher in Switzerland,
and more, many others. But it's very interesting because in the past, a lot of researchers and those who were interested in discovering this ancient technologies of the Egyptians, they stop at the vibrational tech. But there's a very large portion of it that is the molecular water vortex technology that's starting to become a popular thing to study and people are getting into. And so we're just barely scratching the surface of what our ancient Egyptian ancestors had figured out.
So to move on to what was the first time I had been there, and Laura as well, for both of us was kind of a pilgrimage.
Absolutely.
Was Amarna, which is the capital city that was built by Akhenaten, who is known as the heretic. He's known as the heretic because he focused on a monotheistic spiritual hierarchy and was eliminating the various worship of multiple gods. This was a very political thing to do. As you can imagine, the temple systems, just as in Catholicism or Judaism or any other system that has temples, and they are supported by donations of, maybe it's a lamb, maybe it's gold, maybe it's other things, but that they are a system that can become very, very wealthy, very, very powerful, and very, very political. So Akhenaten is the son of Imhotep, and there was a transition in belief during that period. He was very inspired by his father's thoughts, according to our guides, and and when I say our guides, I'm specifically meaning literally the amazing archaeologists and anthropologists who were
Tour
guides,
our security guards.
Yes, they had great insights because they've been to these sites a zillion
incredible
times.
People.
Yeah. So Amarna Akhenaten had decided to move the capital city of Egypt to a site that had had not had a city. It is of course just off the Nile, as all things must be, because everything goes up and down the Nile. The Nile is the ancient highway of.
And I would like to interject one little thing as a possible and my personal theory that in the ancient technology, one of the ancient technologies that the Atlanteans and the Lemurians people had, that and that knowledge was still survived into ancient Sumeria and ancient Egypt, was the water technology that would be used and mined to create electricity, lighting up the top of the pyramid and the whole entire city. This type of technology was then actually mimicked by Nikola Tesla much later in modern science and was able to light up entire cities for free. So the idea of water frequencies mining the electromagnetic energy that came from the Nile River was how they lit up the ancient pyramids that were also the Merkabahs that took you up to Orion's belt, a direct parallel. So we have this as above, so below star celestial alignment energy technology, along with water technology and vibrational technology.
And these are ideas that are really being played with now. And it's fascinating. I mean, just on a basic level, our electricity grid has been based on water and the movement of water. I mean, Niagara Falls is the power basis for much of the electricity in that area of Canada and the United States. So, it's there are, amazing things that are being done and have been done in our lifetime, but there is so much coming out now pointing to other options. Now back to Akhenaten. So Akhenaten is also known as his heresy goes into multiple levels. One is that he was uh, stylistically, the art that's left uh, from his reign is very, very different. And one of the things I noticed, particularly, and although I've seen this in art history books and such, being in front of the what are being called tombs, and these are rooms that have been built out of a mountain that is above the city that was planned and devastated.
And reminds me of some of what the Catholics seem to have mimicked and used much later on, seem to have been very much students of the ancient Greeks. I mean, I apologize, I'm not the ancient Greeks, the ancient Egyptians. And the cave systems in Montserrat are a really good example with the Black Madonna and in the church. And how not only was there a Black Madonna, but as you go hiking through these incredible mountains that are very much terrain-wise similar to what you would find in Egypt, where there is a lot of dry Mediterranean, and also reminds me of the Grand Canyon in Sedona, where you've got these, in Utah, these incredible rock formations. And in particular in Montserrat, this might be a slight digression from where we're going, but the point is, it looks like the fingers of God. And it's these mountains that are shaped like a hand. And then within these incredible mountainous structures that are enormous, there are caves where the monks would live and have hermitage and spiritual, esoteric dominion over within themselves. And so I'm wondering, is this something that came from Akhenaten's civilization?
Well, I think it's something that there's also just what's endemic to humanity. Where do people who are studying and trying to live in a very spiritual way and need to be removed to some degree from the day-to-day society, what do they do? But to kind of get back to the site of Amarna and these amazing cave spaces that have been, if you've been to the Valley of the Kings or are familiar with traditional tombs, there is a tomb structure. There's an architectural protocol that happens in the majority of tombs. First off, most of them are in mountains. They are placed in mountains. The very, very earliest actual structures were underground and had a mastaba above them. And that was a very specific kind of rectilinear building, and it had a very specific formation and protocol for its interior and exterior design. What we saw in the caves of Amarna, or above Amarna, and there are, what we saw was what, four tombs open? Three, four tombs open. We saw three tombs. Looked to me like there might be another one that could be visited. But what we witnessed was, first off, they're being called tombs. We did go to what was a tomb, the Akhenaten family tomb, where his eldest daughter was buried. And that actually has the tomb, the traditional tomb structure, whereby you go down into the space from a higher place, but it literally is built down into whatever the stone formation is, mountain, hill, whatever. And it pretty much maintained the format that you might see in the Valley of the Kings. It did not, the art was different. The art was the Akhenaten stylistic form. But the area, when you go into what they call the North Tomb, the South Tomb, and such, which is far away from where the Akhenaten family tomb is, you have to drive around a large sector. It doesn't follow that format whatsoever. You walk straight into the space. The art is very different. It's not traditional tomb art in the same way that has been standardized. There's also very interesting multi-level aspects to it, but they're not ramps, they're steps. This is a very different structure. In addition, there are sculptures built from, these are limestone caves. They're structured, but full-on statues built right out of them, or carved out of them. To go back to my earlier point regarding hierarchies, there are hierarchies in uh, Egyptian art. And so you will have a god would be the largest, and next to a pharaoh would be sort of a middle size if you have a god. And then the rest of us humans, the lesser humanity, would be smaller than the pharaoh. And then slaves are depicted as very small in these hierarchies. That there was a small hierarchy, but it was not as extreme as what was seen in, or what you can see
and what was
in the
known,
other.
yeah, and what seems to be known based off of what Pamela so brilliantly and detailedly explains is that Akhenaten is known to have had a very powerfully intense vision of equality. And to demonstrate that, I would like to his actual hymn, because a lot of things have been said about Akhenaten, and until you actually come here and look for yourself and find his real words, things will be said about him and the reasons why he did things. There are a few things that we do know that we still haven't mentioned yet, but I'd like to start with this poem that, if Pamela, you would read for us.
Certainly. So this poem is entitled The Hymn of Akhenaten. This is a section of it. It's a translation that is provided at the Egyptian Cultural Museum. Highly recommend going there. It's phenomenal. It also has the mummies that we will discuss in a moment.
Exactly.
So, happily read from it. When you rise upon the horizon, the day breaks, and you shine as autumn in the daytime. You dispel darkness, and when you give forth your rays, the two lands are in festival. People are alert, standing on their feet. Now that you have raised them up, the entire land performs its work. All the cattle are content with their fodder. Trees and plants grow. Birds fly up to their nests. Their wings are extended in praise of you, and the kine prance on their feet. Everything which flies up and alights, they live when you have risen for them. The fishes in the river leap before your face when your rays are in the sea. Whenever you set upon the western horizon, the land is in darkness like death, and one eye does not see another. Every lion comes out of his cave, and all serpents bite, for the darkness is blanket. The land is silent, because he who made them is at rest on his horizon. And this is, of course, the worship of the sun, the god Ra, Aten Ra, which is the monotheistic focus of Akhenaten's transition in religion, or what he was trying to create, a transition and a reform, if you will, of the temple system and such. This is very controversial. There is so much information missing. So it's unsure exactly what occurred, but what we do know, and one of the things we came across time and time again, were the temple powers assassinating pharaohs and people of power. So what we saw, and one of the things that's very, very interesting about Akhenaten, whose second wife was Nefertiti, he's mostly depicted with Nefertiti in a very equal stand, without a differential hierarchy, and their family, which were all daughters. But the thing that's very interesting about his depiction is that he is shown as having a male face, but with a very elongated skull, as is Nefertiti shown, and a very female abdomen and hips. So the depiction is, one of our guides feels that he was showing the connection between the male and female, and that he was promoting that.
And he also had another theory that it could also be possible, and this is where we're going to go next, and a theory that was wonderful to have one of our tour guides open and knowledgeable about, but something that I have done a lot of research and very passionate about is the Rh negative bloodline, and there has definitely been blood tests on these family lineages. We know for a fact that King Tut himself was B negative, and that they all have these elongated heads. Very interesting, because when you get into the story about Akhenaten and Nefertiti and the daughters and him needing an heir that was a son and the bloodlines, and then going to the Museum of Civilization in Cairo and looking at these mummies and knowing the story of Queen T, who was not of the Rh negative Anunnaki line.
She was not royal.
Right. She was not
a priestess, very powerful priestess, but she was not a royal.
And what's very interesting is that it seems like for the ancient Egyptians, being royal actually meant having Anunnaki blood lineages and these larger elongated skulls and different biological features that meant that they could rule. But not only that, they had to have the status of royalty, because there were brothers who were also of the larger headed mummies, but were of different statuses. So among these hybrid beings, we may call them also trying to keep the bloodlines alive, there is a pharaoh who falls deeply in love with a non-royal, non-elongated skull headed woman named Queen T. And she is more passionate about keeping these royal bloodlines going, while she herself is not one of the big heads, which is fascinating.
Yes. So I look at the photographs of the mummies from this collection, the Egyptian Museum of Civilization. It was fascinating. And the heads were not elongated upward, but from the back. And it was really striking and obvious. Also, there's different hair colors and things, but we're not going to go into that. I think, shall we finish up with Amarna?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. As we it, I knew that Amarna had been destroyed, but it wasn't clear the level of devastation until we were standing on
Rubble.
Literally rubble.
Vast landscape of rubble.
And there were different theories offered. One was that, well, it was the city itself was built of mud brick because it was a city in planning and that they had not finished it. So that's why it was so easily demolished, that it just happened over time because it was mud brick. However, what we saw all over the place were red granite bricks. Not large. Let's say, I'd say what, a foot, a foot long, and then about 6 inches square or so. Solid bricks everywhere. Everywhere. The other thing we saw, and that an anthropology major noted, was that it's pretty clear that there was serious water damage. What I know about flooding in that area, of course, it's near the Nile. It's very possible that there were major, major floods involving the Nile. This is, of course, very, very long before any kind of water-related management on a large scale was going on. So I'm referring to the Aswan Dam. The Nile flooded every year. So the level of it this level of devastation was pretty extreme. And of course, other parts of the Nile have flooded, other temples have been flooded over the millennia, and they are still standing.
Yeah.
So what we're hoping to do is dive deeper into this. See if we can find some LiDAR that might give us some clues as to the extent to which it was built. And but it was so devastated that
I would like to just say one thing, Pamela, and leave this as a thought about everything. What made these big heads feel they had to separate from the priesthoods? What made these very obviously different looking humanoids, hybrids, with a completely different philosophy? One where the sun was actually a connection to the self and to the individual, and a much more equal based spiritual personal connection with spirit, and taking away and doing away with the pantheon of the priests who had complete control of the spiritual power of the society at the time, and seeing a lot of these pharaohs assassinated, and seeing these big heads in the mummies, which also, by the way, we are not allowed to photograph. Also very interesting if we can find photographs of these, or if you don't go, you miss out and you won't know. Because that's the thing, I had not the extent of the big head families of the pharaohs and the royal bloodlines, and the importance and why the father would breed with his own daughters, and why there was this obsession with bloodlines that went beyond anything that could ever be explained, and how it's infiltrated throughout the monarchies and the royal families, all throughout civilizations all around the world. But what made these particular big-headed people that look very different than what we consider to be humans now, and knowing we've seen them in Peru, and we see them in the fossils now that are being discussed. Different possible DNAs, but again, similar biological attribute of having larger skulls, and also in Malta, finding these. And so again, going into these mysteries, and then this society having so much information, from mummies to civilizations that had possibly been detonated, but very much destroyed by the priesthoods because they were a huge threat, not only possibly spiritual and power-wise, but what it meant to civilization. And Pamela, I don't know if you'd like to talk a little bit, one last thing about the vertebrae and the light bulbs, and that being something very important to Akhenaten.
Well, I think we need to do a lot more research on that before I want to dive into that. And there have been so many podcasters who talk about that as a potential electric light bulb and things. I'm not sure that that's what that is.
We both don't. Yeah.
I kind of feel differently about that, to be honest with you. It looks like a Kundalini element
Right.
to it, and Blue Lotus, and all of these things. We did talk about that, but what I love that you brought up the question. I can't answer it, but what I do.
But you kind of did by a question with a question, because that's kind of where we are with it. We really need to investigate.
Well, exactly. I think we can see in our modern society, anytime you have an institution that sets up their structure in a way that is going to have to be fed, and I'm talking about any kind of structure, that the way it's maintained requires a very specific protocol, then it's going to have issues with other power structures, and eventually it may have issues. It may not be serving the people that it is, supposed to be serving. It begins to only serve itself. And so it's very possible that that was elemental to these political aspects here. I mean, I'm afraid that's happened many times in humanity. And of course, monarchies intermarrying within families, within their own family to maintain power. You can see
sense
it
strategically.
Right, you can see it on a strategic basis. Totally understandable. However, when you see certain elements to this, it does start to become strange. And of course, the physical anomalies that are extant with
the RH bloodlines
and the RH negative bloodlines, it does get very interesting. So I hope you will do your own research and look into this. The mummies that we saw, if you had been to Egypt in the past, uh, many of these mummies were part of the old Egyptian museum, and you may have had an opportunity to see them then, and even photograph them back then. And I believe most of these mummies can be found through photographs, because they've been very popular to see for a long time. Ramses II and Seti I are probably the poster mummies of all, but there are many others, and if you can see the images of their heads from a side view, I think there's something to talk about there. So anyway, thank you for
so much
coming with us to Egypt, and we hope you will take your own journey on this.
Until next time.